Is the market gonna crash like it's 2006? That's what everybody wants to know, isn't it? It spiked up the rental prices. They didn't want to keep paying on their mortgage if you can go across the street and spend $300,000 less and in the home that they were in. And that right there is why 2022 is not the same as the crash that began in 2006. With interest rates are up, home values are down, inventory is getting higher, days on market is increasing, and price reductions are more and more common every single week. It feels very similar to 2006, but is it really the same? Now just take a look at this graph right here, and you can see homeowner equity levels through every US recession that we've had since 1970. And it is really clear if you take a look at it that the recession of 2006, 8, 9, those years looks very different than any other recession going back to 1970. I'll dig into this graph a little bit more later, but for now, come back with me to 2006 and see for yourself. Okay, so it's 2006. I'm in the middle of remodeling our Tri-Valley home and getting it ready to sell. And we're living in my small Silicon Valley condo. The sale of that home, the Tri-Valley home that we were remodeling with the intent to sell, it never happened. The market turned way too quickly, and by the time we were ready with all the house preparations and the remodel was done, we could not bear to sell it for so much less than we could have just a year earlier after putting so much work and so much money into it. But the truth is, in hindsight, it all turned out to be a very good thing. And now in 2022, I'm really happy to say we still have that home today. I didn't sell that Silicon Valley condo at the time either. And well, more on that later. Now, I know a lot of people are wondering, are we going to see the same crash that we saw back in 2006, 2007, 2008, etc.? Are we going to see that in 2022 or 2023, 2024? The crash that came after home prices peaked in 2006 was due to the subprime mortgage crisis. Loans were being handed out like candy. I remember it like it was yesterday. They were very easy to get, a lot of interest-only loans, variable loans with balloon payments after just 3 to 5 years, and interest rates were scheduled to increase too, and people were paying interest-only payments. So very few requirements on your income. You could literally just tell them what you made and they would take your word for it. You didn't have to prove your income. You didn't have to show tax returns as long as you were willing to accept a slightly higher rate. And a lot of people felt like it was just so much easier to buy a house doing it that way than having to go through all the verification and paperwork that a lot of people just took advantage of it. It was like the Wild West of home loans. The overall consensus at that time was just buy a home. Just buy any home, buy your dream home, spend as much as you want, even if you can't really afford it with the typical home loan, because right now you've got to pay almost nothing. You're putting nothing down, you're putting very little down, and you're only paying interest-only payments for however many years. And then the thought was in 3 to 5 years, the house will appreciate in value. You'll be able to refinance it into a fixed rate mortgage loan, like a standard loan, and all will be okay because that balloon payment and those increases in payments, that'll never come to be because they were only qualifying you on what the price was for an interest-only payment and completely ignoring the fact that very soon you were going to have to be paying a whole lot more. But you know what? It all wasn't okay. So the start of this implosion began in 2006 when home values began to drop and mortgage requirements tightened up. And lenders canceled and closed down HELOCs and lines of credit without warning. In fact, it happened to me. I remember it because I had a HELOC on the condo that I had in Silicon Valley, and I got this letter in the mail saying, your HELOC is closed. And I thought, what? I mean, we were in the middle of remodeling another home, so we could have used those funds, but overnight they were just gone. It wasn't an option anymore. And when those mortgages with the rate hikes and the balloon payments came due and the borrower didn't have the money for the balloon payment or they couldn't afford the increased monthly payment due to the rate increase and now having to pay interest and principal, and lenders weren't offering refinancing to anybody to help them stay in their homes. Many people got into those homes with very little money to no money down at all, and the only money that they had put into the home out of their pocket was the monthly payments so far, which again were interest only. So then what happened is they would see a house across the street that looked very similar, maybe even better to the home that they were living in and that they were buying, selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than what they still owed on their home. They didn't want to keep paying on their mortgage. I mean, why would you want to keep paying on your mortgage if you can go across the street and spend $300,000 less, stay in the same neighborhood, similar home, maybe even a better home, and you can buy that house over there. So people are getting new loans for new houses just blocks away from their old home, And that's what some people did. It was a really short period of time where this opportunity, for lack of a better word, was available and people were able to qualify for those new loans. And in the meanwhile, they just abandoned the home that they were in. I remember a lot of homes sitting vacant with lots of weeds, really tall, growing in the front yards because the owner had just abandoned the house and moved on. They bought another house. They moved down the street. They were just waiting for the banks to foreclose and they just left the houses there. They weren't paying on the mortgages and they weren't paying any taxes. They weren't paying for anything, insurance. I mean, the house was just there, waiting for banks to foreclose. But the banks were really overwhelmed by the amount of homes that they were now taking back ownership of. And it was a really slow process. And then some people stayed in their homes for months to even years without paying a mortgage, without paying a rent, without paying property taxes, without paying insurance, without paying anything of an expense on the house, and essentially living for free, waiting for the banks to come and offer them either cash for keys to get out, which that happened for a lot of people. The banks would come around and offer them some money, a few $1,000s, just to get out of the house and vacate it. Some people waited for them to foreclose before they left. And then when getting a new mortgage became even harder to do, many people couldn't actually buy again. So they just moved into rentals, which then spiked up the rental prices in the market because there were so many people looking for rentals and so few rentals available. Now let's think back. When did this all end? Because now I remember really clearly when the end of this was just beginning, and it was early 2011. We were in contract to buy a home that was a short sale. And while we were in the escrow period, which was a lot longer dealing with the banks than just a standard purchase, prices started going up a little bit. And I was getting nervous that the bank was going to find a way to cancel our agreement and cancel the sale. That didn't happen, but it was a good 3 months that I was holding my breath while we were in escrow because I really thought that we weren't going to get the house and we were going to be back into a market where the prices had gone up. And that brings me back to my point of why 2022 is not the same as 2006 or 2007 or 2008 or any of that time period. And that major difference you can see clearly in the graph I shared at the start of this video. And what is that exactly? It's homeowner equity. Simply put, people have equity in their homes right now that very few people back in the last housing crash had. In 2009, it was really easy to just walk away from a home that had no value, that you owed more on than it was worth, that you could pay less per month by renting or buying a different home, even in the same neighborhood. And you could even buy a brand new home from a builder for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than what you owed on the old house that you were already in right now. It was a no-brainer decision for a lot of people to just walk away from their house and start fresh again. And that right there is why 2022 is not the same as the crash that began in 2006. In 2022, a large percentage of homeowners have equity in their homes. It would make no sense for them to just walk away. And if they refinanced at some point in the past few years, they also have a really low mortgage of like 2 or 3% interest rate. They're not going to walk away from that either to get into a new home at 7+% interest rate because that just makes no sense. You can see in this graph right here where the shaded areas show past recessions going back to 1970. Look at the owner's equity levels in real estate. Every recession since 1970, home equity remained level. Then you see in 2001, there was a slight increase in equity during that recession period. But when you look at 2008 and 2009, there is a dramatic decrease in equity through that recession. And that is what makes it very, very different than any other recession that we have had in the past 30 years. For the past 10 years, since 2012, owner equity has increased significantly, even increasing through a pandemic, and so far is continuing to increase. Some will say they're going to wait for the housing market to crash and prices to come down so that they can buy a house. They're hoping for another 2006 to 2009 crash. But after looking at this historical graph, I want to ask you, how likely is it that you think it's going to happen when this time around homeowners have more equity in their homes than ever before in the last 30 to 50 years? I don't think they're going to just walk away from their homes. I doubt they'll sell super low either, and especially not when they have a low interest rate mortgage. Even if prices come down a little, and I think that might actually happen if we have a small correction, it still isn't likely that any of these homeowners with all this equity are going to be underwater on their homes. If there was an influx of homes put on the market, prices would come down. But in order for that to happen, a lot of owners would have to be willing to give up their low interest rates. And let's be realistic, Unless they're going to be moving out of the area because they have to live somewhere else, it's probably not in their best financial interest to sell their home, give up that low interest rate, and buy something at a much higher rate. If they did, they may end up paying more per month for a new, less expensive home than if they had just stayed in the home that they already have. And that makes no sense for anyone who's moving to try to decrease their cost of living expenses. We are in uncertain financial times. There's no doubt about that. But I personally don't see it playing out in the same way that it did in the last recession and housing crash. Of course, I have no crystal ball. Anything's possible. So, do your own research, draw your own conclusions. And I do realize that some who have been waiting on the sidelines to jump into the real estate market and maybe buy their first home, this may come as a disappointment. And as always, hindsight is 20/20. And as I said earlier, real estate is a great investment when you plan to hold onto it long term. I'm glad we kept that house that we almost sold. I'm also glad I kept the Silicon Valley condo I had, even though I went through the entire crash underwater on it. I owed more than it was worth. I couldn't even get the rent to cover the mortgage, but I am now glad I hung on to it. I'm going to give you the secret to a good housing market. The secret to getting out of a bad housing market, getting into a good housing market, it's time. Not timing, but time. There's a difference. If you can hang on through a bad market, a good market will be just around the corner. And if you look at this graph from way above, you can see that while the recessions are terrible times, people suffer and nobody wants to go through a recession. But if you really look at the graph overview, you can see that the recessions were short-lived in between some really long spans of good markets. So the recessions definitely are shorter than the good times. And if you need a real estate agent, I'm here for you. Give me a call, send me a text, shoot me an email. All my information is in the description below, and I'll see you in the next video.